Morning and welcome to the second reading from, apologise for my croaky voice, the second reading from John Newton's Out of the Depths, the autobiography, quite modern autobiography of the author and minister, and also slave ship captain, as we will see. So today's reading is letters. He's wrote them as letters. I don't know why. Letters 3 and 4, and God willing, next week will be naturally 5 and 6. So, letter 3, early life as a sailor. A few days before my intended journey, I received an invitation to visit very intimate friends of my mother in Kent. Because of a coolness after my father's second marriage, I had heard nothing of them for many years. I obtained my father's permission to call on them, but I was very indifferent about it and sometimes thought of passing on. However, I went. I was known at first sight and met with the kindest reception as the child of a dear deceased friend. My friends had 2 daughters. The eldest, as I learned some years after, had been considered by her mother and mine as a future wife for me from the time of her birth. I do not say that my mother predicted what was to happen, yet there was something remarkable in the manner of its taking place. All intercourse between the families had been long broken off. I was going into a foreign country, and only called to pay a hasty visit. This I should not have thought of, but for a message received just at that crisis, for I had not been invited before. The circumstances were precarious in the highest degree, and the event extraordinary. His future wife. Almost at the first sight of this girl, for she was then under 14, I felt an affection for her, which never abated or lost its influence a single moment in my heart. In degree, it equalled all that the writers of romance have imagined. In duration, it was unalterable. I soon lost all sense of religion and became deaf to the remonstrances of conscience. But none of the misery I experienced ever banished her a single hour from my waking thoughts for 7 years following. Hardly anything less than this violent and commanding passion would have been sufficient to awaken me from the dull, melancholy habit I had contracted. I was also misanthrope, notwithstanding I so much admired by the pictures of virtue and benevolence as drawn by Lord Shaftesbury. Now my reluctance to active life was overcome, and I was willing to be or to do anything which might accomplish my wishes at some future time. Restraining effect of love. When I later made shipwreck of faith, hope, and conscience, my love to this person was the only remaining principle which in any degree took their place. The bare possibility of seeing her again was the only means of restraining me from the most horrid designs against myself and others. But the ill effects it brought counterbalanced these advantages. Courtship is indeed a pleasing part of life. When there is a mutual affection, the consent of friends, a reasonable prospect as to settlement, and when it is conducted in subordination to the will and fear of God. But when these concomitants are wanting, what we call love is the most tormenting passion and the most destructive in its consequences that can be named. And they were all wanting in my case. I dared not mention it to her friends or to my own, nor for a considerable time to her. I could make no proposals. It remained as a dark fire locked up in my breast, which gave me constant uneasiness. It greatly weakened my sense of religion, and opened the way for the entrance of infidel principles. Though it seemed to promise great things as an incentive to diligence and activity in life, in reality it performed nothing. I often considered what I would willingly do or suffer for the sake of her I loved. Yet I was incapable of forcing myself away from her company to improve opportunities. It did not prevent me from engaging in a long train of excess and riot, utterly unworthy of my honourable pretensions. And though, through the wonderful interposition of divine goodness, the maze of my follies was at length unravelled, I am sure I would not go through the same series of trouble again to possess all the treasures of the Indies. I now considered everything in a new light. I concluded it would be absolutely impossible to live at such a distance as Jamaica for a term of 4 or 5 years, and therefore determined that I would not go. I could not bear either to acquaint my father with the true reason or to invent a false one. Therefore, without giving any notice to him why I did so, I stayed 3 weeks instead of 3 days in Kent. I thought the opportunity would be lost and the ship would have sailed. I then returned to London. I had highly displeased my father by this disobedience, but he was more easily reconciled than I expected. In a little time I sailed with a friend of his to Venice. In this voyage I was exposed to the company and bad example of the common sailors, among whom I ranked. Importunity and opportunity presenting every day. I once more began to relax from the sobriety and order which I had observed in some degree for more than 2 years. I was sometimes pierced with sharp convictions. Though I made a few faint efforts to stop, I never recovered from this declension as I had from several before. I did not as yet turn out profligate, but I was making large strides towards total apostasy from God. The most remarkable warning I received, and the last, was a dream, which made a very strong, though not abiding impression on my mind. His dream of the ring. The scene was the harbour of Venice, where we had lately been. I thought it was night, and my watch upon the dock. As I was walking to and fro by myself, some one brought me a ring, with an express charge to keep it carefully, assuring me that while I preserved that ring I should be happy and successful, but if I lost or parted with it I must expect nothing but trouble and misery. I accepted the present and the terms willingly, not in the least doubting my own care to preserve it, and highly satisfied to have my happiness in my own keeping. Then a second person came to me, and observing the ring on my finger, took occasion to ask some questions concerning it. I readily told him its virtues. He expressed surprise at my weakness in expecting such effects from a ring. He reasoned with me some time, and at length urged me to throw the ring away. At first I was shocked at the proposal, but his insinuations prevailed. I began to reason and doubt, and at last plucked it off my finger and dropped it over the ship's side into the water. At the same instant a terrible fire burst out from a range of the mountains, a part of the Alps which appeared at some distance behind the city of Venice. I saw the hills as distinctly as if awake, and they were all in flames. I perceived too late my folly. My tempter, with an air of insult, informed me that all the mercy of God in reserve for me was comprised in that ring which I had wilfully thrown away. I understood that I must now go with him to the burning mountains, and that all the flames I saw were kindled on my account. I trembled and was in a great agony, but my dream continued. As I stood self-condemned, without plea or hope, suddenly a third person, all the same who brought the ring at first, I am not certain which, came to me and demanded the cause of my grief. I told him plainly, confessing that I had ruined myself wilfully and deserved no pity. He blamed my rashness, and asked if I should be wiser, supposing I had my ring again. I could hardly answer, for I thought it was gone beyond recall. Indeed, I had not time to answer before I saw this unexpected friend go down under the water, just in the spot where I had dropped the ring. He soon returned, bringing it with him. The moment he came on board, the flames in the mountains were extinguished, and my seducer left me. Then was the prey taken from the hand of the mighty, and the lawful captive delivered. My fears were at an end, and with joy and gratitude I approached my kind deliverer to receive my ring again. But he refused to return it, and spoke to me, "If you should be entrusted with this ring again, you would very soon bring yourself into the same distress. You are not able to keep it, but I will preserve it for you. Whenever it is needful, I will produce it in your behalf." I awoke in a state of mind not easy to be described. I could hardly eat or sleep, or transact my necessary business, for 2 or 3 days. But the impression soon wore off, and I totally forgot it. It hardly occurred to my mind again till several years afterward. A time came when I found myself in circumstances very nearly resembling those suggested by this extraordinary dream, when I stood helpless and hopeless upon the brink of an awful eternity. Had the eyes of my mind been then opened, I should have seen my grand enemy, who had seduced me wilfully to renounce and cast away my religious professions, and to involve myself in complicated crimes. I should probably have seen him pleased with my agonies, and waiting for permission to seize and bear away my soul to his place of torment. I should perhaps have seen likewise that Jesus, whom I had persecuted and defied, rebuking the adversary, challenging me for his own as a brand plucked out of the fire, and saying, "Deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom." However, though I saw not these things, I found the benefit. I obtained mercy. The Lord answered for me in the day of my distress, and blessed be his name. He who restored the ring, or what was signified by it, vouchsafes to keep it. Oh, what an unspeakable comfort is this, that I am not in my own keeping. The Lord is my shepherd. I have been enabled to trust my all in his hands, and I know whom I have believed. Satan still desires to have me, that he might sift me as wheat, but my Saviour has prayed for me, that my faith may not fail. Here is my security and power, a bulwark against which the gates of hell cannot prevail. But for this, many a time, and often, if possible, I should have ruined myself since my first deliverance. Nay, I should fall and stumble and perish still. After all that the Lord has done for me, if his faithfulness were not engaged in my behalf to be my sun, S-U-N, and shield, even unto death. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Nothing very remarkable occurred in the following part of that voyage. I returned home in December 1743, and soon after repeated my visit to Kent, where I protracted my stay in the same imprudent manner as before. This again disappointed my father, and almost provoked him to disown me. On board a man of war. Before anything suitable offered again, I was pressured, owing entirely to my own thoughtless conduct, which was all of a piece, and put on board a tender. It was at a critical juncture, when the French fleets were hovering on our coast, so that my father was unable to procure my release. In a few days I was sent on board the Harwich at the Nore. I entered here upon quite a new scene of life, and endured much hardship for about a month. My father was then willing that I should remain in the navy, as a war was daily expected, and procured a recommendation to the captain, who took me upon the quarter-deck as a midshipman. I had now an easy life as to externals, and might have gained respect, but my mind was unsettled, and my behaviour very indifferent. I met with companions who completed the ruin of my principles. I affected to talk of virtue and was not so outwardly abandoned as afterward. Yet my delight and habitual practice was wickedness. My chief intimate was a person of exceedingly good natural talents and much observation. He was the greatest master of what is called the free-thinking scheme, and knew how to insinuate his sentiments in the most plausible way. He could hardly have laboured more in the course if he had expected to gain heaven by it. This man, whom I honoured as my master, and whose practice I adopted so eagerly, was overtaken in a voyage to Lisbon by a violent storm. The vessel and people escaped, but a great sea broke on board and swept him into eternity. Thus the Lord spares or punishes according to his sovereign pleasure. But to return, I was fond of his company. Having myself a smattering of books, I was eager enough to show my reading. He soon perceived that I had not wholly broken through the restraints of conscience, and therefore did not shock me at first with too broad intimations of his design. He rather spoke favourably of religion, but when he had gained my confidence, he began to speak plainer. Perceiving my ignorant attachment to the characteristics, he joined issue with me on that book and convinced me that I never understood it. He so plied me with objections and arguments that my depraved heart was soon gained, and I entered into his plan with all my spirit. Thus, like an unwary sailor who quits his port just before a rising storm, I renounced the hopes and comforts of the gospel at the very time when every other comfort was about to fail me. In December 1744, the Harwich was in the Downs, bound for the East Indies. The captain gave me liberty to go on shore for a day. Imprudently disregarding consequences, I took horse and followed the dictates of my restless passion to take a last leave of her I loved. I had little satisfaction in the interview, as I was sensible that I was taking pains to multiply my own troubles. The short time I could stay passed like a dream, and on New Year's Day 1745 I returned to the ship. The captain was prevailed on to excuse my absence, but this rash step, especially as it was not the first liberty I had taken, highly displeased him, and lost me his favour, which I never recovered. At length we sailed from Spithead with a very large fleet. We put into Torbay with a change of wind, but turning fair again, we sailed the next day. 7 of our fleet were lost in attempting to leave that place. The following night the whole fleet was greatly endangered on the coast of Cornwall by a storm from the southward. The darkness of the night and the number of the vessels occasioned much confusion and damage. Our ship, though several times in imminent danger of being run down by other vessels, escaped unhurt, but many suffered much, particularly the admiral. This occasioned our putting back to Plymouth. While we lay at Plymouth, I heard that my father, who had interest in some of the ships lately lost, had come down to Torbay. He had a connection at that time with the African Company. I thought if I could get to him, he might easily introduce me into that service, which would be better than pursuing a long uncertain voyage to the East Indies. It was a maxim with me in those unhappy days never to deliberate. The thought hardly occurred to me before I resolved to leave the ship at all events. I did so. Sorry, the pages seem to be stuck together. I did so, and in the worst manner possible, I was sent one day in the boat to take care that none of the people deserted, but I betrayed my trust and went off myself. I knew not what road to take, and dared not ask for fear of being suspected. Having some general idea of the country, I guessed right, and when I had travelled some miles, I found upon inquiry that I was on the road to Dartmouth. All went smoothly that day, and part of the next. I had expected to be with my father in about 2 hours, when I was met by a small party of soldiers. I could not avoid or deceive them. They brought me back to Plymouth, and walked through the streets guarded like a felon. My heart was full of indignation, shame, and fear. I was confined 2 days in the guardhouse, then sent on board my ship, kept a while in irons, then publicly stripped and whipped, after which I was degraded from my office. All my former companions were forbidden to show me the least favour, or even to speak to me. As midshipman I had been entitled to some command, which, being haughty and vain, I had not been backward to exert. I was now brought down to a level with the lowest and exposed to the insults of all. My present situation was uncomfortable. My future prospects were still worse. The evils I suffered were likely to grow heavier every day. While my catastrophe was recent, the officers and my former shipmates were disposed to screen me from usage, but during the little time I remained with them afterward, I found they cooled very fast in their endeavours to protect me. Indeed, they could not avoid it without running a great risk of sharing with me. The captain, though in general a humane man, who behaved very well to the ship's company, was almost implacable in his resentment when he had been greatly offended. He took several occasions to show himself so to me, and the voyage was to last for 5 years. I think nothing I either felt or feared distressed me so much as to see myself thus forcibly torn away from the object of my affections, under a great improbability of seeing her again, and a much greater of returning in such a manner as would give me hopes of seeing her mine. Thus I was as miserable on all hands as could well be imagined. My breast was filled with the most excruciating passions, eager desire, bitter rage, and black despair. Every hour exposed me to some new insult and hardship, with no hope of relief or mitigation, no friend to take my part or to listen to my complaint. Inward or outward I could perceive nothing but darkness and misery. I think no case, except that of a conscience wounded by the wrath of God, could be more dreadful than mine. I cannot express with what wishfulness and regret I cast my last look upon the English shore. I kept my eyes fixed upon it till it disappeared. When I could see it no longer, I was tempted to throw myself into the sea. According to the wicked system I had adopted, this would put a period to all my sorrows at once, but the secret hand of God restrained me. Letter 4. Voyage to Africa. Though I desired your instructions as to the manner and extent of these memoirs, I had already begun to write. When I began the 8 letters, I intended to say no more of myself than might be necessary to illustrate the wonders of divine providence and grace in my life, but I account your judgment a sufficient warrant for enlarging my plan. Among other things, you desired a more explicit account of my courtship. This was the point in which I thought it especially became me to be very brief, but I submit to you. This seems a proper place to tell you how it stood at the time of my leaving England. When my inclinations were first discovered, both were so young that no one but myself considered it in a serious view. It served for tea-table talk among our friends, and nothing further was expected from it. But when my passions seemed to have abiding effects, so that in 2 years it was not at all abated, and especially as it occasioned me to act without any regard to prudence or interest, or my father's designs, and as there was a coolness between him and the family, her parents began to consider it as a matter of consequence. When I took my last leave of them, her mother, expressing the most tender affection for me, as if I had been her own child, told me that she had no objections that at a maturer age there should be a probability of our engaging upon a prudent prospect. Yet, as things then stood, she thought herself obliged to interfere. She therefore desired I would no more think of returning to their house, unless her daughter was away from home, till such time as I could either entirely give up my pretensions, or could assure her that I had my father's express consent to go on. It was all difficult, but though she was young, gay, the old meaning for the word gay, which I presume is happy, and quite unpractised in such matters, she was directed to a happy medium, a positive encouragement or an absolute refusal, would have been attended with equal though different disadvantages. But without much studying about it, I found her always upon her guard. She had penetration to see her absolute power over me, and prudence to make a proper use of it. She would neither understand my hints, nor give me room to come to a direct explanation. She said since, that from the first discovery of my regard, and long before the thought was agreeable to her, she had often an unaccountable impression that sooner or later she should be mine. Upon these terms, we parted. No fear of God before his eyes. I returned to my voyage. During our passage to Madeira, I was a prey to the most gloomy thoughts. Though I had well deserved all I met with, and the captain might have been justified if he had carried his resentment still further, yet my pride at that time suggested that I had been grossly injured. This so wrought upon my wicked heart that I actually formed designs against his life. This was one reason that made me willing to prolong my own. I was sometimes divided between the two, not thinking it practicable to effect both. The Lord had now to all appearances given me up to judicial hardness. I was capable of anything. I had not the least fear of God before my eyes, nor, so far as I remember, the least sensibility of conscience. I was possessed of so strong a spirit of delusion that I believed my own lie, and was firmly persuaded that after death I should cease to be. Yet the Lord preserved me. Some intervals of sober reflection would at times take place. When I had chosen death rather than life, a ray of hope would come in, though there was little probability for a hope that I should yet see better days, and that I might again return to England and have my wishes crowned, if I did not wilfully throw myself away. My love was now the only restraint I had left, though I neither feared God nor regarded men. I could not bear that she should think meanly of me when I was dead. As in the outward concerns of life, the weakest means are often employed by divine providence to produce great effects beyond their common influence, for instance, a disease removed by a fright. So I found it then, this single thought, which had not restrained me from 1,000 smaller evils, proved my only and effectual barrier against the greatest and most fatal temptations. After the word fright, there's a bracket, but I can't find the one to begin the sentence, but never mind. Most fatal temptations. How long I could have supported this conflict, or what, humanly speaking, would have been the consequences of my continuing in that situation, I cannot say. The Lord, whom I little thought of, knew my danger, and was providing for my deliverance. Discharged from HMS Harwich. 2 things I had determined when at Plymouth: that I would not go to India, and that I would go to Guinea. Such indeed was the Lord's will concerning me, but they were to be accomplished in his way, not in mine. We had been at Madeira some time. The business of the fleet was completed, and we were to sail the following morning. On that memorable morning I was late in bed. I would have slept longer, but one of the midshipmen, an old companion, came down and between jest and earnest bade me rise. As I did not immediately comply, he cut down the hammock in which I lay, which forced me to dress myself. I was very angry, but dared not resent it. I was little aware how much his caprice affected me. This person, who had no design in what he did, was the messenger of God's providence. I said little, but went upon deck, where I that moment saw a man putting his clothes into a boat, who told me he was going to leave us. Upon inquiring, I was informed that 2 men from a Guinea ship, which lay near us, had entered on board the Harwich, and that the Commodore, Sir George Pocock, had ordered the captain to send 2 others in their room. My heart instantly burned like fire. I begged the boat might be detained a few minutes. I ran to the lieutenant, and entreated him to intercede with the captain that I might be dismissed. Though I had been formerly upon ill terms with these officers, and had disobliged them all in their turns, yet they had pitied my case, and were ready to serve me now. The captain, who, when we were at Plymouth, had refused to exchange me at the request of Admiral Medley, was now easily prevailed on. In little more than half an hour from my being asleep in bed, I saw myself discharged and safe on board another ship. This was one of the many critical turns of my life in which the Lord was pleased to display his providence and care by causing many unexpected circumstances to concur in almost an instant of time. These sudden opportunities were several times repeated. Each of them brought me into an entirely new scene of action, and they were usually delayed to almost the last moment in which they could have taken place. Sinning with a high hand. The ship I went on board was bound for Sierra Leone and the adjacent parts of what is called the windward coast of Africa. The commander, I found, was acquainted with my father. He received me very kindly and made fair professions of assistance. I believe he would have been my friend, but without making the least advantage of former mistakes and troubles, I pursued the same course. If possible, I acted much worse. On board the Harwich, though my principles were totally corrupted at first, I was in some degree staid and serious. The remembrance of this made me ashamed of breaking out in that notorious manner. I could otherwise have indulged, but now, entering among strangers, I could appear without disguise. I well remember that while I was passing from the one ship to the other, this was one reason why I rejoiced in the exchange. One reflection I made upon the occasion was, that I now might be as abandoned as I pleased without any control. From this time I was exceedingly vile indeed, little if anything short of that animated description of an almost irrecoverable state which we have in 2 Peter 2 verse 14. I not only sinned with a high hand myself, but made it my study to tempt and seduce others upon every occasion. I eagerly sought occasion, sometimes to my own hazard and hurt. One natural consequence of this was a loss of favour with my new captain. Not that he was at all religious or disliked my wickedness more than it affected his interest, but I became careless and disobedient. I did not please him because I did not intend it, and as he was a man of an odd temper, likewise we the more easily disagreed. Besides, I had a little of that unlucky wit which can multiply troubles and enemies to its possessor. Excuse me a minute. Upon some imagined affront, I made a song in which I ridiculed his ship, his designs, and his person, and soon taught it to the whole ship's company. Such was the ungrateful return I made for his offers of friendship and protection. I had mentioned no names, but the allusion was plain, and he was no stranger either to the intention or the author. I shall say no more of this part of my story. Let it be buried in eternal silence. But let me not fail to praise that grace which could pardon, that blood which could expiate such sins as mine. Yea, the Ethiopian may change his skin and the leopard his spots. I, who was the willing slave of every evil, possessed with a legion of unclean spirits, have been spared and saved and changed to stand as a monument of his almighty power forever. Thus I went on for about 6 months, by which time the ship was preparing to leave the coast. A few days before she sailed, the captain died. I was not upon much better terms with his mate, who now succeeded to the command, and had upon some occasion treated me ill. I had no doubt that if I went with him to the West Indies, he would put me on board a man of war, and this, from what I had known already, was more dreadful to me than death. To avoid it, I determined to remain in Africa and amuse myself with many golden dreams, that here I should find an opportunity of improving my fortune. Enters the slave trade. There are still upon that part of the coast a few white men settled. There were many more at the time I was first there, whose business it was to purchase slaves in the rivers and country adjacent and sell them to the ships at an advanced price. One of these, who at first landed in my indignant circumstances, I think that should be indignant, had acquired considerable wealth. He had lately been in England and was returning to the vessel I was in, of which he owned a quarter part. His example impressed me with the hopes of the same success, and upon condition of entering into his service, I obtained my discharge. I had not the precaution to make my terms, but trusted to his generosity. I received no compensation for my time on board the ship, but a bill upon the owners in England. This was never paid, for they failed before my return. The day the vessel sailed, I landed upon the island of Benanos with little more than the clothes upon my back, as if I had escaped shipwreck. And letter 5 deals with his trials in West Africa, and letter 6, which we'll read next week, of course, along with letter 5, enters the service. It deals with his entering of a service of a new master. So, until then, God willing, may God bless you all. Amen.